Welcome back. We're going to continue to look at transitions. We've already looked at image transitions and effects that we can apply to images. Right now we're going to move on and look at transitions and effects that we can apply to text elements. So as you recall, here's where we left off. There's our document with the image transitions in it. Here's our HTML. That document open in Visual Studio or whatever text editor you're using, and the accompanying CSS. So let's hop back into the HTML. I'm going to add one more break, and then I'm going to create another divider. This is a whole new section, so I'm going to create a new comment here. Text, background, effects. Oh. There we go. And what are we going to start with? We're going to start with kind of fill from the top. So you'll see often, obviously, in a lot of navigation menus, when you hover over the text element, something indicates that what item you're over. You know, maybe there's some sort of transition. And again, there's so much you can do here. We're just going to look at some examples here. We're going to, most of these examples, if not all of them, are going to actually focus on the background, what we can do with the background of that text. But there's really, again, tons that you can do. So let's just create a really basic menu. So an anchor tag. Oh, I need to put maybe I'll just put an anchor tag there. I'm going to apply the class now just so I don't have to come back to it, even though we haven't created it. I'm just going to call it vert for vertical. And I'm going to put home in there. I'm going to save some time, copy and paste, and go change the second one to, say, contact, and the third one to about. So very simple navigation menu, home, contact, and about. We have the class vert applied to it. We haven't defined that class yet, but we do have it there. So I'm going to save, come back, reload, and we'll see that we got it in a row there. I'm going to make one little change because I don't want it. I'm going to put breaks after each one. BR after each one, save, reload. There we go. There they are. They don't do anything. There's no effect yet because we haven't defined that yet. So this will, there's some things that, there's some quirks about some of the stuff that we're going to be looking at, and just bear with me and follow along, and we'll discuss them as we go. So now I'm back in my CSS document. I'm going to open up a new comment, and like I did way up at the top, with image transitions, I'm going to put text transitions, and because this might serve as a reference document for me later, so I want it well commented and explained. So our first one is we're going to call full width vertical. So what did we have there? We had a class that we called .vert. The effect that the end effect that I'm going to try to go for is basically when I hover over the text, the background of the text gets filled in with a little curtain of color. So we're going to use transitions to sort of, and the hover effect, transitions to control the movement of that little curtain, and the hover effect to actually activate it. But first, right off the bat, I want to get a sense. I just want to show you. So let's say background color. We'll just let it be red and save. Reload there. So now we see the background of those elements. You can see where they, what I'm going to do, I'm going to come back here. I'm going to make that bottom div, that padding, a little bit bigger. Save, reload. There, now I can bring it up a little bit more. So we get a sense of that is the background of those text elements. It follows the width of the content. In this case, the word home, contact, and about. They're different length words, so the backgrounds are different lengths. But with that, a color to the background of those text elements. And what the end effect that I want is for it to, as I hover over, for that color to come in and come in from the top. And we're going to do that by altering the size of the background when we hover over it. But there's a couple of quirks here. We use, in the CSS, we're going to use a command called background size. We can target the background size of an element. The problem is the background size command only works on things that CSS and HTML consider images. It will not work on a background color. It does work on gradients. Gradients are treated like images. So what we want to do, in my end effect, I just want that background to be red. But what I need to do for this to work, what I'm going to do to work, is make that background a gradient. So linear gradient, but I don't want it to actually be gradient. I want it to be solid red. So I'm going to make a gradient that goes from red to red. Save, come back here, reload, and it doesn't change. It has changed. It's no longer a solid red color. It's no longer background color being applied. It's a gradient, but it's a gradient that's just fading, transitioning from red to red. So the end result is it's solid red. It's a bit of a hack, but for this to work, it's what we need to do, because the background size that we're going to use to transform the background won't work on just a straight background color command. It has to be an image or a gradient. There's one other thing that we need to do for this to work. We need background repeat to be set to no repeat. Basically, it's if we don't have that line of code in here, nothing that follows is going to work. So as long as we have that in there, we're fine. So obviously with linear gradient, if you didn't want it to be red, you can put any color in there that you want. You know, you can put a hex value in there. I'm just using red because it's just easy for me to type. And you can also have it actually be a real gradient. It could be a gradient from one color to another, and this would still work, but I just want it to be solid. So here's our default state. The background is fully red through gradient, and we have background repeat essentially turned off for this to work. As I mentioned, what we're going to be using here is a command called background size, because I want the impression of this background dropping in and dropping out. So basically what I'm going to be doing is having that background shrink and expand based on the hover state. So I'm working in the standard state, the non-hover state, and for background size, I'm going to put in two values. The first value is the horizontal. How big is this background horizontally? Let's say I want that to be 100%, and I put a space. The second value that I put in will be how big do I want that to be vertically? Let's say I want that to be 0. If I save that and come here and reload, the colors disappear because the vertical size is set to 0. It might make more sense just to illustrate it. I'm going to put the second one at 25% and save that and reload. It's now that background, which is the red gradient, is only 25% of the vertical space of that element. You know, you can reverse these numbers and say, oh, I want it only to be 50% horizontally. The first value is the horizontal space. And now you can see it's 50% width of that element, and I have it 100% vertical, so you can control these numbers. For this exercise, I want it to be 100% vertical when I'm not hovering, and 100% horizontal when I'm not hovering over it, and 0 vertically. So again, in its default state, it's invisible because the vertical background size is set to 0. When I hover, so dot vert hover, what do I want to change here? I want the sensation of this curtain dropping down behind. So I want to target again the background size state. So when it hovers, this is how it's going to change. So I still want it to be 100% of the width, but I want it to go to 100% of the vertical, of the height, to fill that in. Save, reload, and now on hover, it's full. But it's happening immediately. There's no effect of it dropping down. So this is where the transition will come in. So returning to our default state, because we want to make sure this effect comes both in and out when the user hovers in. So we apply it to the default class and not the hover class, transition, and we put whatever number we want in here. We're going to put 1 second and save, reload. Now it's actually transforming as it comes in, but that's fine. And now you can see it's dropping in from the top. That's because of the default state. The background is 0 vertically. On hover, it's going to 100 vertically, and it's being told to take 1 second to do that. So it creates the effect of this slow drop down. That would probably be too slow, or I would find it too slow. So I'm going to make it a little bit snappier because it is a nav menu. I'm going to go down to 1/4 second, reload, and there we go. If I'm going to show you this background repeat, I'm going to remove that, come back, reload, and now it doesn't work. So we just kind of have to trust me on this one. We need that background repeat in there for the effect to work. So that's a vertical drop down. We can, let me pop back over here to my HTML, and we can kind of take the exact same approach and make it a horizontal effect. So I'm going to just copy this to make my life a little easier. Paste. Fill from, change it though, obviously. Fill from the side, we'll call it. Instead of vertical, we'll call it horizontal, horizontal, and horizontal. Save. Reload. How does that look? Now we've got that. Got the next three. I'm going to throw a break in there just so we can separate these a little bit more. Reload. There we go. So no, I haven't created a class, but they're there and they're just waiting for the CSS to tell it what to do. So let's go back over here. You know, again, I'm going to be a little bit lazy. I'm just going to copy all of that CSS, full width, horizontal. I spelled that right. Oh, and I need to rename that. Horizontal, horizontal. And all I need, really all I need to change this is one element. So again, in the default state and the background size, I had it, when it's not being hovered, it's 100% wide and 0% height, rendering it invisible, and then transition to 100% height, so the fade is coming down. All I want to do here, if I want the effect of the color coming in from the side, is I just need to flip these values. So it's 0% horizontal when it's in default, when it's just at rest, essentially, and 100% vertical. And now when it transitions to the hover, the background size is going to transition to 100% horizontal. It's already up, filling up and down, so it's 100% horizontal, and we should get the effect of it fading in from the side this time. And there we go. And you can experiment with this. If you could have this start at 0, 0 for the background size, so there's no vertical height and no horizontal height, and it's transitioned to 100%, that should give an unusual effect, I think, of it coming in sort of from the corner. It's pretty subtle, but it is actually fading in from the corner. But that was not what I was going for, but it just shows, you know, you can experiment with all this. So one last time, make sure I got that right. Yep, fading in from the side. Let's see what else we can do. Going to put another break in here, and what else we can try to do almost like an underline effect. Oops, I just deleted that. Copy, paste. I'm going to call this last section underline, under custom class I'm going to create will be called under. Save, return here. There, I've got my 3. This is it, but it's not doing anything because I've applied a style that doesn't exist. And here I'm going to add new section, call it underline. I'm going to call this even more specific and call this full underline. So what are we to do this? It's going to be, it can actually be almost exactly the same of what we've done before. I just don't want it to fill the whole text block. I want it just to be a stripe that runs underneath. But I still want it to go horizontally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow this code again from the horizontal transformation that we just did, because it's going to be very similar. I'm just going to add one more element to this, something that we haven't seen yet. So we do need to, what did I call this? Under and under. So if I save, come back here, reload, this is doing the exact same thing, but I don't want it to fill the text. I just want it to be a line under the text. And what we can use for that is I'm just going to put it in here before the background size command is we're going to reposition where that background is in relation to its content. We're actually going to push it down. So we can use background position. And similar to background size, we can enter two values in here. The first one being vertical, or sorry, horizontal, and the other one being vertical. So 0 is would be 0 for both would be the default, the top left corner. In this case, I want to move that background down underneath the content. So I don't want to move it, shift it left and right. So I'm going to put the first value is still going to be 0 because that's the horizontal position. And then the second value, I'm going to put in a number to say that background position needs to be like lower from the very top. By default, it's starting at the top. I want to push it down. So let's say this might take some experimentation. I'm going to start with 1 rem. I'm going to use the rem value here, or value just to start. And let's reload. And you can see it's been pushed down from the top. It's not filling the top, but it's not enough. So I'm going to try 2 rem. Save that, reload, and there we go. That's the effect I wanted. To have it essentially underlined. So it's the exact same transformation as this. I didn't change any other code about the background size changing. All I've done is by using background position, I pushed it down under the text. Which is a nice little effect. And again, you could come in and experiment with that. The transition timing, save, reload, you can make it slower. Or faster, whatever you like, lots to experiment with. So again, background position, the first value is the horizontal, so 0 is basically leaving it where it is, the left side of the element. And then the second value is the vertical. And so 0 would be at the top. In this case, I wanted to be lower. And you could experiment. I mean, it will probably take some experimenting to get the number that fits correctly. Maybe you want to use percentage. Maybe you want to use other values in there. For this case, I've used rem. which can often be very predictable when dealing with text. On the same, can try something sort of similar if we, this is an underline, if we wanted to do almost sort of the opposite, like a vertical highlight down one side of it. So I'm going to go back to my HTML, copy that text again. I'll call this vertical highlight. What do we want to call this? I mean, I'm just going to call beside for now because it's going to run beside the text, but you could call whatever you want, something that makes more sense to you. Beside, and save that. Again, returning here. We'll see one more entry with nothing, with no effect. Go into styles. I'm going to copy that again and call this vertical highlight. What did I call it? Called beside. Make sure there we go. So this one also gets a little tricky. Let's see what we need here. In this case, we have I can do this a little differently. I'm going to remove background position. I'm going to remove background position, and I'm going to look at background size. And take a see background size. So I'm going to go for background size. I'm going to go. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to try to keep it narrow. I'm going to try to keep a narrow horizontal strip. So I'm going to do 0.5 rem. And I want this little highlight to come from the top. So again, the vertical will be 0. And when it transitions, I want it to be still only be 0.5 rem and transition to 100%. So with this approach, I'm forcing the background size to be quite narrow, like a strip, a vertical strip. And then in this non-hover state, it's at 0 height, and then it's transitioned to 100. So I should get a little strip appearing. And I'm going to save that and reload. And you can see that transition coming in. It's a skinny bar because I forced the horizontal background size to only be essentially half a character. And then the transition, like we did, I think right off the top, is transitioning from the top to the bottom. And it's, I mean, that, that might be nice. I kind of picture this more like an underline being completely beside the text. So I'm thinking there's 2 ways that we might be able to do this. I'm going to try one. I'm going to try putting a negative value in the background position to see if I can push the background over, but I don't know if it's going to work. It might. because it's outside of the element, it might become invisible. And if that doesn't work, I know something that should work. So I'm going to try this first. Background position. So let me think. The first value is the left, right. So by default, it's 0. I want to actually make that a negative value. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try negative 0.5 rem, and then the background horizontal position, or vertical position, I should say, I want to leave it neutral. So I'm going to see if this works. I don't know if you can do a negative value. And it didn't work. So I think I've pushed that background, the little red stripe, off of, it's to the left of the text now. But because it's to the left of the text, it's outside of the background area of that element now, so it's invisible. So thought that might work, but it didn't, and that's fine. This is where experimenting comes in. I think what I need to do is move the text away from the edge of the background. So in that case, I want to use padding, and I want to use padding left specifically, because I want to push the text off of the left-hand border to allow room for that color bar to appear. So I'm, again, just going to experiment with numbers. I'm going to do 0.5 rem, see if that works. Yeah. That looks okay. Maybe a little close. And I would just at this point, oops, experiment, maybe it's 3/4. Yeah, I like that. You know, in another circumstance, I mean, it looks a little odd here because this text is now no longer lined up with these texts, that text, but I think normally you wouldn't have all these multiple nav menus, and I think it would look fine by itself. So just a lot of experimenting you can do. I mean, you could control the width of that background if we wanted it to be, you know, a little skinnier. We control the background size that we put there. Now it's a little skinnier, but then maybe we need to bring the padding back so it's closer. Oh, that's a little bit too much now. But yeah, you just experiment and you know, whatever works for you and your application. But there's obviously tons of things that you can do. And what we've employed sort of consistently here is we're using transitions, we're using the hover state, and we're altering, we've sort of targeted the background size, position, you know, anything to sort of create these different effects. So it's really about sort of having a plan for what you want and then experimenting and trying. And, you know, sometimes it can take a little while to get exactly what you want, but you just keep at it, and there is a ton you can do. One last thing, which is kind of related to, it's not necessarily a transition the way that we've seen these other transitions, but a very common one that you might want to apply and that you'd see a lot of is, you know, well, I'll just get started here. But basically, often you're on your web page and you get to the bottom, and there's a button here to go back to the top, to transition back up to the top of the page. So we do that. I'm going to put in a new entry here, and we're going to call this smooth scroll, let's just say smooth scroll button for now. And what are we going to do? We need to create a button. So an anchor tag. It's going to have an href equals. So we're going to use an ID as opposed to, because that's how you'll build these. How you link to other parts of the page, we use IDs. So right now we're telling what is the target of this ID, and the target is going to be, and if we're using ID, we start with a hash symbol. So the href, so the target equals hash symbol, and then let's call it top of page. We're going to have to create that. And then I need text. What is the actual link for this text? And let's just say it's going to be back to top. Save, come back here, reload, and it's back to top. I click that, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere because I haven't created that target yet. Oh, we got it there. So we're going to go back to the very top of our page, right to the body. And we're going to create basically a target for this to come to. I mean, we could probably use this div. No, maybe we won't just use the top div, or we could create. I mean, I'll create a new one. So create a new div, we'll just make an empty div. I don't see why there'd be any reason I couldn't just target the top one, but this way, if I move that later, I'll just leave this empty div here and it'll always be the target. So div, in this case, it's ID, it's not class, because we're using ID to target that button. Div ID equals, and then top of page. I think we should work and we just leave it as an empty div. So let's just save that. Come back here, reload. And there we go. I hit my top of page button and I'm brought up to the top. There's essentially the very top, even above this first image, a empty div that has the ID, the name of top page, and then this button is going directly to it. What does this have to do with transitions? Well, as you can see, this is, again, quite jarring. You click it and you're instantly taken up to the top, and it's not a great effect. And we can do one last kind of a transition, sort of different than the other ones that we've done. And for that, we'll go back to our styles document. We could put it at the top. We could put it in the bottom. We can really put it anywhere. I'll just put it at the bottom for now, because I'll continue with my naming and call this, oops, smooth scroll. And in this case, we're going to apply this class to the entire HTML. So basically, we're applying it to the page itself. And the command that we're going to use here is scroll behavior. And it's smooth. Save that. So we've applied the CSS command of scroll behavior smooth to the entire document. Reload this. So it reloads that CSS, go down to the bottom, and now when I hit back to top, we get a nicer transition back up to the top of the page. Super simple, a nice little thing to add on, and just makes that interaction of return to the top of the page much more, pleasing and pleasant. So there we go. Those are some examples of transitions that we can apply to text elements, really using the background command and the size and the position. So we have a vertical drop, we've got a horizontal fill, we've got an underlined effect, we've got a little vertical highlight effect. These are just purely examples. There's much more that you can do. I would just really recommend to experiment and it can be frustrating at times, especially when you're starting dealing with the background positioning, but just keep at it and experiment. You can't really break anything, and yeah, have fun and see what you can do. And again, this is just a starting point. There is much more you can do, and I recommend just experimenting, see what you come up with.